Let me tell you a personal story. The year is 1996. I'm fresh off the boat. I go to school in southern Maine. Most people at school hadn't seen a Russian before, so I'm pretty exotic. I am popular with girls. They're nice and friendly to me. Much friendlier, much nicer than the girls in Russia at my Russian university had been. And lots of dudes want to meet me. I seem very interesting to most people because I come from a large country that is mostly unknown, the hair of the old USSR. I come from Russia. One day, an older guy comes to me and introduces himself, a law student in his mid-30s. He invites me to hang out with a local rifle club, and I gladly accept the invitation. One of the weekends on Sunday, we get together like 40 people, and we will drive deep into the woods of western Maine. Quite a place. It's like taiga, woods, nothing else. We drive for a couple hours, and we get to this guy's house, one of the law students' house. He has a large house and a barn. And the barn is full of guns. Oh my gosh. The guy was a collector. And I'm absolutely amazed. I have not seen anything like that before. Guns lovers' paradise, really. Everything that shoots, including a Tommy gun, high caliber machine gun they installed from a large helicopter, and even a bazooka. Gosh, a real bazooka. Then the guy has a troop carrier, registered, street legal, registered in Maine with Maine license plate. Unbelievable. Coming from Russia, where guns are strictly forbidden to own for regular people, that really amazed me, So we load up and go to nearby shooting range. Well, imagine 4 large Ram trucks full of guns, full of ammo, just anything you can imagine. The guys around me they look like crazy nuts. Each one of them has literally a couple rifles and a few handguns and all this ammo boxes and everything. Whoa. The range is nothing but a huge pile of sand, a very high pile of sand, like a 5-story high, and that's it. We set up targets, mostly soda bottles, tons of soda bottles, bunch of paper targets, and we start shooting. And everyone treats me like royalty. And of course, I am exotic, and that is my first time shooting ever. Everyone wants me to try their guns. It's like their pride and joy, That day, I shoot everything that shoots. I use everything that shoots, literally, okay? Except for bazooka. Now, of course, I want to try bazooka. I want to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie The Commando. But the owner turns me down. Too expensive, he says. Hey, if you want to pay a few $100s per shot, be my guest. But, it's on you. I don't want to spend that kind of money. I simply don't have it. Out of everything I shot with on that day, I remembered 3 things. First is a revolver, 45 millimeter, I think, caliber, called Colt Magnum. I was like, Dirty Harry had that gun, That gun, handgun, packed a powerful punch with recoil so strong, it literally hurt my hand. Not a small and not a weak one. It's pretty cool stuff. Then I remembered an M16 rifle, a sweet thing, lightweight, adjustable, little recoil, very sharp, not so noisy. Fantastic gun. And, of course, I remembered old, trusted AK-47. Everyone loved AK-47. when they were taking that gun into their hands, they all of them, they started smiling. They were treating it like their baby. One of the guys owned 3 AK-47s, a Chinese made, a Latin American made, and the authentic, the one and only, the original AK-47 born in Izhevsk, Russia. The owner gave me a lecture on how his guns were different. You know, the Latin American made was somewhat decent, but not that great of a quality. The Chinese was crap, but it was really cheap. It cost almost like nothing. You know, it would jam all the time. It was hugely unreliable. And the Russian one, it was most expensive, but it worked like magic. Never jammed, never overheated, you know, can put it into dirt, mud, water, swamp, whatever, take it out and it shoots. It works. He even liked it more than American M16. He said the M16 was too attentive. It was too fragile. Like, it had to be kept clean. It did not work if sand would get inside and things like that. Would be, you know, nice gun, but you had to really take care of it real hard. Well, the Rifle Club, they all absolutely loved the Russian guns. Believe it or not, but that love for the Russian guns kind of rubbed on me, you know, because I was the same country as the guns, no matter how weird it sounds, but that's true, okay? The Russian-made guns had quite a reputation. So other arms that were manufactured in Russia. After all, the mighty Russian army, number 2, some said number 1, in the world, was equipped with Russian-made guns, hardware, you know, arms. What else can you desire if you like guns? But that, my friends, was before. Let's talk about how everything has changed now. Howdy everyone, my name is Konstantin. Welcome to Inside Russia, where I give you news updates on what I think is important and on what I think that truly explains what's really happening inside Russia now. What you will not find on this channel is BS, propaganda, and lies. What you will find on this channel is logic, common sense, and truth. And emotions, because I am human after all. Inside Russia is where usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian. First 30 minutes, I deliver a message of the day, and after, if you want to, you can participate in the live stream chat, conversing, asking questions, commenting. You know, I invite you to do so, and I would love you to do that very much. Thank you. You know, in the last year, boy, life has changed, you know. But in the last year, I have heard different people, experts, politicians, regular people, kitchen talks, you know, that kind of stuff, speaking on everything except for one thing. Russian arms and sales of Russian arms, exports. Kind of a closed topic in the shadows somewhere, you know. I literally have not heard that discussed once anywhere, okay? And I shall fix that today. Let's talk about Russian hardware sales and what it's all about. Russian guns, like I said, they had a reputation. The reputation was coming, of course, from the USSR. The old country had incredibly advanced technology, and at the same time it had incredibly outdated, obsolete technology. Well, you know, if you try to guess, then most likely you'll guess it right. The cutting-edge stuff was military, and outdated was everything else, because the government cared for a great deal for its army, and it didn't care about regular Soviet people at all. So the best jet planes, the best tanks, the best subs, the best space stuff, the best almost everything, at least until early 80s. Then the Americans started catching up with excellent planes, tanks, plane carriers, etc. But the Soviet hardware back in the day was absolutely excellent, the gold standard. That was the time in the 70s and in the 80s, that was the time when the reputation of Russian arms was being built, created. Many countries were incredibly interested in getting Russian hardware. Some got it for free in unlimited amounts. Countries like Cuba, Angola, Nicaragua, every place where the Soviets were storing the pot and trying to install communist governments. Oh, those governments got the best hardware at no price, military aid, so to speak. The communist governments, But most countries actually were paying pretty penny for Russian stuff. If you ask any non-Russian to name Russian stuff that they know, most likely you will get something like matryoshka, balalaika, vodka, and AK-47. In 1980, close to peak of its glory, Soviet arm exports amounted to 35% of all world's arms exports. 1/3, exactly. Imagine, 1/3 of all arms sold in the world. 70% of all Soviet exports, arms exports, went to non-communist countries. It means that the customers were buying. They were paying for the stuff, because the stuff was good. The arms were excellent. Tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery, supersonic combat aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, guided missile boats, subsonic aircraft, minor major surface combatants, and submarines. Number one was made in the USSR. The Americans were not even close. Well, my American friends, please stop, take a chill pill, and don't start throwing rocks into me, because every time I say that America is not or was not number one and something, what happens? Americans pick up rocks and start throwing to me. I'm telling you the truth. Go and fact check me. Go and double check. And I'll explain you in a couple minutes why it was the case. From 1979 to 1984, the United States was the only major supplier of armored personal carriers and armored guns. And that's it. Armored cars, And that's it. But the Soviets, they had competition. So who was the competition? Believe it or not, the Western Europeans, especially the French. They were also producing some darn good hardware. The reason for that insane arms Soviet dominance was understanding that the USA and the Soviet Union in the 70s achieved, in the beginning of the 70s, achieved parity in nuclear missile programs. In other words, both countries had similar nuclear capabilities, similar amount of nuclear missiles, and they basically reached, the same distance, okay? So there was a parity. And also there was a mutual understanding among the politicians of the USSR and the USA that the nukes will not be used under any circumstances. Yes, the Soviet leaders were smarter and more humane than the current leaders of Russia. They did not threat anyone with nukes, or, it was just blah, blah talk, okay? Now we don't know what Putin and all the rest of the Russian leadership have in mind. We just don't know, okay? So, but back in the days, there was understanding nukes would not be used. Therefore, in the 70s, the USSR did a huge modernization of its military forces and weapons. It was understanding in the USSR that conventional arms on the ground, if the war happens, will be the key factor in victory, because the nukes were out there, but they were not to be used. So the USSR did a huge modernization of its military force and weapons in the 70s. And that resulted that towards the end of the 70s and early 80s, mid 80s, Russian hardware was the best in many areas. Strong army was a completely nuts national idea. I still remember I was growing up as a kid. Strong army was the national idea and such a pride for Soviet people. We're all saying, oh, we're so proud of our army. Our army is mighty strong. And it protects us from the bad guys. So, of course, Americans were the bad guys. Woo. Well, things changed in 1991. Well, actually, in a nutshell, things started changing in the mid-80s. The USSR first started getting feverish, and that fever quickly grew into a mortal disease, and in 1991, the USSR died. Fell apart. The 90s came. Oh boy, the times of opportunity. Everything changed to the opposite. What was black turned out to be white overnight. All of a sudden, we realized that we were the bad guys and the Americans were the good guys. But that was all good because we turned from the bad guys into the good guys now. Remember that song? Walking down the Moskva, down the Gorky Park, listening to the wind of change, the Scorpions. That was the mood of the 90s. We're all good guys now. We're gonna cooperate. We're friends. We're gonna make money. We have like markets, and oh boy, we had everything flew into our markets. We're finally open. All of a sudden, our national idea was not army, was not dominance, was not victory, was not communism, but simply good old making money. And in the 90s, we did not know how to make money. No, we did not know. It usually takes decades for society to learn how to create good products and how to add value. And we certainly did not have decades. We wanted it all, and we wanted it now, right then. And you know what was started happening? There were two very popular schemes how to get rich quick. Very rich quick. First, you would take a control over of a large manufacturing plant with tons of equipment, heavy equipment. Trucks, conveyor belts, buildings. You would start immediately cutting everything metal into pieces and selling it as scrap metals. You heard me right. It sounds absolutely crazy, but that's what everyone started doing. Because the factory had not been yours. You had not built it. But by magic circumstances, because the USSR fell apart, it belonged to the country, overnight you turned out to be the owner of a huge plant. And some plants were worth, probably billions of dollars. But no one knew what to do with them. So people started making quick millions of dollars instead of using the plants, the machinery, and in the long run, making hundreds of millions, okay? But we weren't smart enough. Everyone wanted to get rich quick. Everyone had had enough of the Soviet stuff, of this communist BS, Everyone wanted to live life. Everyone wanted to travel. So lots of people made literally you cut up everything that is metal, you make couple $1 million, that's a lot of money, but you had an asset that could be making you hundreds of millions, literally. So anyway, it was really happening, no matter how weird it sounds. The second scheme was the Russian army. Oh boy, El Dorado. The generals literally overnight became the masters of the arms, the hardware, the ammo, the food, the clothing, the aircraft, the missiles, everything. They owned everything pretty much in unlimited amounts. It was called, well, there was the military hardware of all kinds, and then there was the reserves. The food, in case war happens, there were like hundreds of thousands of tons of meat, canned meat, veggies and stuff like that. There was like millions of uniforms, you name it. So, and all of a sudden, the generals owned it. They could use it at their liking because there were no audits in the army, no KGB, no police, no revenue service coming. There was no one above the generals. They answered to no one. Imagine what started happening. Major theft was not considered something really criminal back in the 90s. It was just a way of making business. You go to the army, you talk to not even generals, you talk to major, you go to colonel, you go to, captain. Whatever they had their hands on, they would sell it to you. For very cheap, you go resell. When they just give it to you, and it was called going into business together. Just give it to you, go and sell it someplace else. You share the money and stuff like that, I can't even imagine how many tanks, how many planes, how many submarines, how many guns. Oh my God, guns! There were tons and tons of millions of guns, AK-47, from the Soviet times. Imagine how much many of those would go all over the world. Want to learn more about it? There's actually a very good movie. It's called The Lord of War with Nicolas Cage, and it was made in 2005 and is actually based on a true story. Very, very good movie. I like it, and it's a showcase. Nicolas Cage comes to Odessa in 1992 or something like that, and he has a relative in Odessa. He's an immigrant in the United States, and his relative is a general. And the guy, opens up like a huge warehouse with like MiG-29 planes, and he said, well, have it. The tanks, just anything. And Nicolas Cage starts selling it. Okay, Odessa was actually a very, very big port where illegal arms sales were happening in the 90s. There were rumors about that. But anyway, in the 90s, no one thought of research. No one thought of any kind of development. No one thought of production, manufacturing more advanced equipment, hardware, tanks, because one simple reason. No one cared. The government did not pay for it. The government did not have money for it. Hey, all of a sudden, we needed no protection from anyone. Who was gonna attack us? NATO, the Americans? If you told that to someone in the 90s, they would do this. Are you crazy? Are you feverish? Are you idiot? Why would they attack us? They're friends now. Remember, 90s, not 2022. Anyway, 90s were the El Dorado, and the Russian army was definitely a place to make money from. In 2000s, things started changing. The major theft continued, but it took different forms. You see, the government was striking back, slowly at first, increasingly stronger towards the end of the decade. Major changes started taking place. Vladimir Putin became the president of Russia, and he started getting the grip of Russia. He started building the vertical of power. I've said about it so many times in the other streams. I'm not going to be talking about that today. Anyway, he started tightening the government's control over everything, including defense, including the army. Actually, army was the first thing he started getting a grip on. You see, in the 90s, most of enterprises, most of plants, most of factories, they were privatized, meaning they had been owned by the state, and then they were sold or given away to private hands, privatized. They had private owners. And owners started using them to their liking. A lot of them started, like I said, cutting equipment into pieces. But not so with the military enterprises. Just give you one example. There is a large helicopter plant in Rostov-on-Don, right in the middle of a city. They were still manufacturing helicopters Mi-8, workhorse of Russian army, of Russian fleets, just air fleets. If you are into military, you must have heard of them. Mi-8. Well, all of a sudden, the plant that was manufacturing and producing the helicopters for the Russian army became private. And it started selling helicopters all over the world, but the money was going to the shareholders, not to the government. I think the government was one of major shareholders, but they were private people as well. And hundreds of factories that manufactured everything from, ammo to helicopters, they were privatized. Putin started changing that. The government started buying manufacturing facilities back. And they started with the army stuff, military stuff. What they did, they started creating a huge state-owned holding companies. For example, Rostov's helicopter plant was bought from the shareholders back. I think the price was around $75 million, if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on that. I remember it from 2004 or 2005. And the owner was actually given money and was let out of Russia with the money. That's impossible now, I think. But that plant started belonging back to the government. And Putin was putting key people in charge of those huge corporations. This helicopter corporation right now owns all the plants that manufacture everything helicopter, from helicopters to parts, to ammo, to helicopters, to guns, whatever. So he started putting his people in charge. And stealing continued, but now it was different kind of stealing. The government was financing, not just stealing theft from the army, whatever had been left from the USSR, but the government would give money to these large state-owned companies for military research, for hardware research, for new technologies, for semiconductor research. And that money would just be spent, but there would be no result presented. And it continued for a very long time. But guess what? Russian hardware was still being sold. It definitely lost a huge market share, a huge percentage of its market share, but it was still being sold. And actually it brought lots of money into Russian budget. The best year for Russian arms trade was 2013 in the recent history, 2014. And on 2014, Ukraine happened and Crimea happened, and Russia was placed under sanctions. And the arms sales, exports, they started dropping. But they were still significant, Guess who became number one in selling the arms all over the world? The United States of America. They caught up, finally. In the 90s, they started coming out with really, really good high-tech stuff, very effective. And they certainly started beating Russian hardware by a great margin. But Russia was still selling things that were designed engineered and manufactured in the 80s and sometimes even in the 90s, because those things were good. They were basic. AK-47, gosh, it was designed and created in 1947. AK-47, 47 is the year it was made. Russian tanks, Russian jet planes. I mean, they were not as expensive, but they were still good. MiG-31, MiG-29, Su-31. They were flying. They were flying good. And there was a problem in the 90s, though, that increasing problem into 2000. You see, they started stealing more and more money while manufacturing stuff. And I remember there was a huge scandal because Russia sold so many MiG-29 planes to India. And the Indians started asking for their money back, sending the planes back, because they would break down so often. And the quality of parts that Russia would be supplying as a part of a service contract was also very low. And, the planes were basically non-operable, you couldn't fly them much, okay? So problems like that started appearing. In the USSR, this situation would have been absolutely impossible, okay? So Russian arms started dropping in quality and reputation started going down. But it just doesn't drop overnight. It's a long deterioration process, so to speak. So this process started, and it was going on through the 90s and 2000s, okay? But still, there was a myth that the Russian army is number 2 in the world after the American army, and Russian hardware is still good. Not as good as it used to be, not as advanced, not as high-tech, but solid. Solid, reliable, just like AK-47. Doesn't matter, it's almost like, 100 years old. It will be in 20 years. But it still works. It's still, reliable. So, the myth of the Russian army and the Russian hardware. Well, guess what happened? 2022 came, and the myth is busted now. And guess who busted the myth? Russia itself. Russian army, Vladimir Putin gave an order to the Russian army to invade Ukraine. And the war started, and gosh, there's a comparison between the Western hardware now and the Russian hardware, which is basically the Soviet hardware from manufactured a long time ago. Lots of stuff was stolen. Lots of stuff was replaced with, lower quality parts and things like that. The new stuff that's supposed to be flying, exploding, taking off, moving, does not move much. Because, you know what, in order for that to fly, move, you actually got to research and manufacture, and you got to do a good job, and you shouldn't be stealing money, okay? So for the past 15 years, 20 years, really, nothing was done. There are no new products. It turns out that Russia does not have any semiconductors whatsoever. It cannot manufacture anything high-tech whatsoever, although there's so much money from the Russian budget, from the pockets of Russian taxpayers, was spent to design everything, including the semiconductor. There are no reliable engines, airplane engines, automobile engines, tank engines. There are no reliable new guns. There are very unreliable rockets that don't fly that well, not as well as the Soviet rockets used to fly. And there's simply not enough of everything. there is a shortage of ammo for artillery, and it's not a secret anymore because they talk, Russian propaganda people talk about it on TV. There is complete lack of drones in the Russian army. You know what they do? They actually go to AliExpress, a Chinese company, and buy DJI drones and use them in the Russian army, which is crazy. DJI just banned, I think AliExpress banned the sales of drones into Russia for that reason. Basically, it just shows a very sad state of the Russian army. And it shows the very sad state of Russian hardware. What we're seeing right now, these years, 2022, 2023, probably 2024, these are years that are ending the era of Russian hardware, okay, military hardware. I am pretty sure what's going to happen in Ukraine is after this war is over, Russian military is going to be, well, controlled by other countries a great deal, okay? And that definitely is not going to help Russian arms, thank goodness, to be developed, to be researched more, to become high-tech and things like that. And the reputation that was created in the 70s and the 80s for the Russian arms has been destroyed. Again, it's been destroyed by the theft that was going on for 3 decades now, and it was destroyed by what is going on in Ukraine. I mean, we can compare T-70s and even T-90s, the Soviet tanks that were designed and made in the USSR, to American Abrams tanks and German Leopards. And you know what? The comparison is not favorable to the Russian stuff. Even if Russia is allowed to sell its arms and produce and sell in the future, I don't think there will be many countries that would want to buy that stuff, okay? Because this is the worst advertising that Russian army, Russian military industrial complex could do to itself in the world, what's happening right now, okay? And it's best advertising for American stuff and German stuff and British stuff, by the way, and the French stuff. You know, this is where the arms sales exports will go to. Well, you know what? The end of the era of Russian arms, of Russian military, in my eyes, it's a good thing. Because in order to have a strong army, first of all, you need to be responsible. In order to have, I like the idea of owning guns, because I think that gun owners, regular people, they are responsible. They know how to handle guns. They know better not to use guns on other people. Because if you threaten other people with gun, you get shot, plain and simple. So the gun owners, for the most part, very, very balanced, very common sense people that respect others, respect others' rights, respect others' freedoms, and they know how to handle their guns. Guns can be compared to the armies. If a person can be compared to a country, then guns can be compared to army and arms in the army. In order to maintain a strong army, to do research, to sell weapons, you need to be responsible. You need to have responsible government, responsible leadership. You need not be a threat to your neighbors. The good example is France, Germany. Russia has failed the test. It started the war with Ukraine, and it's about to lose its army. It's about to lose its arms, and that's going to be a good lesson to Russia in the future. And this has been my message for today. Thank you so much for coming, watching, listening, giving me a chance. Thank you so very much. I would like to ask you to continue and go into the live stream chat. I would love that very much. But before I turn on the chat, I'm asking you two things. First, please help me spread my message by making reposts in the social media accounts that you have. And second, please sign up for my Telegram channel called Inside Konstantin's Russia. The link will be under in the description under the video once the live stream is over. Telegram channel is where I keep members updated and I do announcements of the videos. So would you please consider doing that? Also, it'd be nice if you hit the like button if you liked what you just heard, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any further updates.